So, as was mentioned, I have been a pastor for a long time, and I've been asked to share a pastor's perspective on what it means to welcome and to foster a community of belonging for people with disabilities. But right now, I am a full-time chaplain, and I teach at the chaplain school. Now, it was a number of or I guess it was a number of months ago. I was asked to do this workshop, and I tried to explain that I had just bought 5 yoke of oxen, and but apparently they had heard the excuse before, so they didn't go for it. So I want you to take a moment to think about something. I want you to imagine that one of the nice, deeper communion people come to you, whisper in your ear right now, and say, "You know that plan for the banquet that we were having after the last session? Something has happened. We can no longer do it here in this building, and nor do we any longer have the food that was originally planned for that banquet." And what the plan is we're all going to go to your place, and you're going to provide the banquet for all of us tonight. What is your reaction? No, you're not. So yeah, after the anxiety attack there, and you're dealing with the stress of that. There's going to be some questions that you're gonna have to be thinking through, right? So, do you live alone? Do you have a spouse? Do you live with a parent? Do you live with children? Do you have a roommate? Like, maybe they might have some say in this if you're bringing all of these people. Where do you live? Do you live in an apartment? Do you live in a house that is large and you have lots of space? Is it a place where you have lots of chairs and a huge table that would just be perfect for a nice gathering like this? Or would everyone be kind of just put into closets and stuck anywhere you had space? Uh, do you have a lot of food at your house right now? Are you someone who keeps a big pantry just full of stuff just in case a few dozen people just randomly show up for a meal? Do you have that? Do you have a big freezer where you got lots of stuff that you can draw from? I just recently moved back from Nova Scotia, and I'm not sure if my wife has quite forgiven me for leaving her chest freezer in our sunroom in our place in Nova Scotia. It didn't get into the truck, and that did not go well for that to be left behind because she likes to have the room to have all of that food available in case we need it. So obviously, if we were going to have a a literal banquet, you need to have preparations. Preparations have been made for this one. There is space, there are tables, there are chairs, there is food. All of these things have to be in place. And this is something I want you to keep in mind as we consider what it means to have a banquet of belonging in the sense of fostering a community in which people of all abilities are feeling like that is their place, that they absolutely belong there. And so, just as we consider what would we need to prepare ahead of time for a literal banquet, we're going to look at what it means to prepare ahead of time for the kind of banquet that we're talking about here. Now, during my time as a pastor, at a certain point, it came out that I was interested in disabilities, and a lot of that came about because at that point, 2 of our children had autism. Now, because of our 2 oldest children, and I would write about that and share about that, and so the word got out that I had talked about disabilities, and I had been thinking about disabilities, and so people would just contact me. I would get phone calls, I would get Facebook messages, formal disability ministry with your one that you know of disabled person. That's what they're looking for. Well, I always feel like I disappoint them because the stuff I want to tell them are things that don't seem, at least to many people, relevant at the beginning. And yet, based on my experience and based on my research in my doctor ministry program, these are actually the key things that we need to look at. So we're going to look at what is needed to prepare for the banquet. Just as we would go out and get those tables, we would go out and get the chairs, we get the groceries, the cutlery, all the other things that we would need. These are the things that we need to do. So the first thing is we have to consider our theology. And again, this is where I feel like I'm disappointing people because that's not what they're looking for. They want something practical that they can use to help a family that's dealing with disabilities. And yet, if we don't have our theology right, then things can get bad really, really quick. So, how does your theology fit with disability? Do you see a disabled person as someone who is broken and who needs to be fixed? Do you see disabilities as a sign of a lack of faith? Do you see disabilities as part of the natural diversity of humanity in the way that God created us and that it is something to be celebrated? These are all things that have been a part of churches that I've belonged to. So, for example, I attended a church once where they had a formal disability ministry, but they made sure to get um, these people who are primarily people with intellectual disabilities, get them into the basement as quick as possible because their theology didn't really allow for people with disabilities. It was almost an embarrassment to what they believed about certain things. So we need to work through this. What do we mean when we talk about people created in the image of God? What does that mean? We hear about this a lot, but what do we mean about that? I have very frequently heard that the image of God, what it means for us to be created in the image of God, is our ability to reason and to use logic. That is over and over again. That's what I hear as the image of God. Well, if that is the case, that means people who struggle to use reason and logic reflect less of the image of God, and those who excel in that are reflecting more of the image of God. And I don't think that when people say these things from the pulpit that they are meaning to exclude people. They're not even thinking about that because they haven't wrestled with these concepts. And this is why practically we have to figure out our theology. It doesn't mean you need a full-blown theology of disability, but at least to think through some of this stuff beforehand so that you're not saying things that ultimately can hurt people quite badly. The second thing is dealing with the reason for our worship. And again, this is not what people are expecting when they're looking for help with disabilities. And yet, this is one of the most important things for us to consider. And in fact, I would say this is the biggest revelation that I personally had in my own wrestling with what these things look like. So, I focus a lot of my time on autism. So I myself am autistic. Three of my five children are autistic. So autism is something that's very, very important to me. And the most common question that I receive from pastors is, what do I do if an autistic person starts making noise during the worship service? What do I do? And ultimately, they're not asking what to do because I'll share and they'll push back pretty quickly. And I realize what they're looking for is permission to remove them when this happens, because this is something that they're very concerned about. And I would want to back up for a moment, well before that person with autism shows up at your church building, and to ask, why are we worshiping? Now, I suspect that many of our churches, in their minds, are thinking that worship on a practical level is something that we present to our community. We try to put on the best show, and I don't mean show in a bad way, but the best production that we can, with the best musicians, the best speakers, uh, even special effects, perhaps. You want all of the technology to work right. You want the sound system to work right, because you are hoping that someone is coming to visit your church that Sunday, and they're going to be impressed. They're going to think, wow, they do things really, really well. That music was so good. The speaking was so good. Uh, all of their multimedia technology, it was so smooth that, yes, that's it. I want to come back, and I want to bring more people, because these people know what they're doing. They're professional. They obviously value excellence. And if that is the case, if that is at the forefront of your theology of worship, that it is a means of outreach, so that you're presenting something that you hope will ultimately pull people in an attractional model. What happens when someone with a disability makes noise? My first experience of this, I was on a pulpit exchange. I'm a Baptist pastor, and I exchanged with the local Presbyterian pastor. And I'd never been to his church before. And so I was there, and I get up and I start preaching, and I start hearing this really loud noise in the congregation. I can't tell who it's from, but I look, and no one's looking around trying to figure out what's going on. It just seemed to be normal. And so I just continued preaching, because I took the cue from the congregation that that's just was a part of what was going on. And so that was okay. But for many people, for many congregations, you're hoping that there's not going to be a meltdown, especially when it's that Sunday that this new young couple comes in. It looks like, they may have children with them, and they have a lot that could bring. And you really want to get them to stay at the church, and something horrible happens. A child starts throwing hymn books up in the air, and ripping a Bible, or something like that. They get really upset. And we think, no, how can this be? This is wrecking everything. Why did it have to happen this Sunday? These are the kinds of things that I think pastors naturally worry about. I know I have had those thoughts as well. And yet, worship is more than that. In fact, I looked at the New Testament, looked at what worship is about, and all the examples that we have, and I didn't see anything in there about it being about us. Not anything. Like, some of the common things that you would hear just among the average Christian, I didn't really get anything out of worship this morning. The music, just, I'm not talking about tonight, of course. It was excellent this afternoon. But people will say that I didn't like the music, I didn't like the preacher, I didn't like the joke that he gave. Yeah, the prayers were too long. Yeah, I just didn't get anything out of it. There's nothing like that in the New Testament. You won't find anything about that. It's about God. It's about worshiping God. And so we have to ask the question, is someone with a disability making noise, or walking around, or doing something that is seen as disruptive, does that stop God from receiving the worship? I don't think so. I cannot imagine God thinking, "Oh, I was just ready to accept that church's worship, and then that kid started humming, and then it ruined it for me, and now I can't receive the worship." I don't believe that one bit. But if we don't understand that, if we don't get to the point where we realize it's just about God, and it doesn't matter if something happens, I realize it's stressful. I was that parent. Our oldest son, in the middle of a worship service, when I was taking a break from pastoring, said, "Just kill me now." I, and which is really funny for us because he was minimally verbal, so we rarely heard him talk. And that he says that, and of course we're like in the third row, and then afterwards we thought probably many people in that church had thought those same words, but uh, that's a story for another day. So these things can happen, but we need to wrestle with this. If you don't figure it out beforehand, then you're not going to know how to respond when there is some kind of situation which someone's being loud or moving around or whatever. What I want you to notice so far is that everything we've talked about has nothing to do with adding a line item to the budget or recruiting volunteers or anything like that. Like what we're talking about here, any church, if you have a church and there you have like 10 people coming out regularly on a Sunday morning, you can do exactly what I've talked about here, these first two things. And if they did those first two things, they'd be way ahead of a lot of other churches. But there are other things we have to consider. So physical accessibility. We've already talked a lot about this. Many churches think you add a lift, you add a ramp, you're accessible. You're all good. That is not the case. It is much more complex than that. I was pastoring at a church in which we advertised as being an accessible church with accessible bathrooms. And then we had a person who was a regular part of our church attempt to use the bathroom. And at some point, we had added little trim pieces to make things look nice that just narrowed it enough that the wheelchair couldn't get through. And so, despite the sign on the door that says it's wheelchair accessible, he could not get in there. But we didn't know. We had no idea. And so something very easy to do is to get someone with a wheelchair to take a tour of your church building to see where they can go, where they can't go, and to identify what is going on. But there's other things that have to do with accessibility. What about sensory issues? I visited a church. Actually, it was the church where I was baptized, and a lot of changes had to happen since the last time I had been there. And now they had went to sort of a concert feel to the Sunday services. So the lights were turned down, and they had fog machines, and they had like a spotlight that would go across the pews during it. And I have to tell you, my autistic self, I wanted to run out of there. If it wasn't for the fact that I was there to support a friend of mine who was the guest speaker, I could not have handled it. Now, I'm sure that a lot of people enjoyed it. It was something that was good for a lot of people, but this is a part of accessibility. What is your policy on scents? How do you use lights for special effects? Are there issues with the sound system? I attend the chapel at the military base where I serve, and for the last month or so, the mic on the pulpit was really hot, so that it was always ringing. Anytime anyone was near that mic and spoke into it, it rang. And for myself with autism, my wife with ADHD, it was driving us crazy. And people at first weren't that worried about it. It's like that's fine. It is what it is. But eventually, they did get it fixed, and we're thankful for that. How much does your service rely on people being able to see an image or words on the screen? So actually, nothing that I put up here you have to see. You don't have to look at it. I do it because that's what people do. But I don't put anything there that you have to see something on that screen in order to get what I'm trying to communicate. There are all kinds of ways you can test things out. You can have someone with a disability come and visit your church and to give you feedback, report back to you. How did things go? Was there things that needed to change? Were there things that were good? It's something you need to consider. Now, staying on the theme of Banquet, it's always good to have a go-to recipe, right? Something that you can do like quickly on any occasion. So my wife's away for the week. I have our teenage children, and so generally I'm on to do for them. And there are some easy things when I get home from work, I'm really tired. Well, there's this easy thing I can do, and they'll at least have food in their bellies, whether they like it or not. They'll have it. And so the case for us is we need a go-to recipe, and that recipe is relationships. We This is really what not just what disabled people, but anyone really wants in terms of church. They're looking for relationships. Now, what that relationship looks like is going to be different from person to person. So, for me, again, if I attend and visit a church and every single person comes to me and wants to be my best friend, I will never visit that church again. I do sorry, that is overwhelming for me. Yeah, a couple people wanna come and chat, that's great. But then on the other hand, I have visited churches where not one person came. That they even had the shaking of hands in the middle of the service, and people are shaking hands all around me, and nothing happened, and I'm like, "Whoa, this is an issue." So be sensitive to what the relationships look like. But again, notice that you don't have to have a line item for that in your budget. It's not going to cost you. You don't need a special um, volunteers for this. Sometimes churches will have that, the people who actively seek out newcomers and whatever. But we're not talking about a program. We're talking about actually having relationships. And this is important. The next thing I want you to understand is that for families that have, especially when it's families with children with disabilities, it's always easier not to come to church. And you need to realize that. Uh, yes, we want people to come to church, but you have to understand the challenges of it. It was talked about this morning that it's always an adventure. And that is indeed the case. There was lots of times where we were almost ready to go to church and things were starting to fall apart. And so I went myself because I was the pastor and I was expected to be there, but it didn't quite work out the way we wanted. One church where we were at, I was at that church for 9 years. And I would say the last 4 years, my wife attended maybe once or twice a year. She would stay home with our children. When our autistic children were really little, they were cute, adorable, easy for the ladies in the church to watch over during Sunday school. As they got older, it became more difficult, and it was just really, really hard. There was no blessing to us to try to get our children there. They would escape. My daughter is a very much a daddy's girl, and she could hear my voice from downstairs, and she'd escape to run up, and I still remember her, she ran right by me, and we were singing the song, "Pass Me Not," and she passed me by while we were passing not, and yes, she was, very excited to see me, but she was quite upset. So it's difficult. When I took a break from church ministry, uh, I stayed home and my wife went to church because it was just easier to do. And so sometimes we think that, these families they should feel thankful that they're in our congregation, that they're in our building, that they get to receive the religious goods and services that we have to provide that Sunday morning, that they should feel thankful to us for that. But the fact is, it's always going to be harder for them to come. And this means the bad experiences are really going to stick, but also the good experiences are really going to stick as well. So, what is it ultimately that we need? What we need is for us to take a posture of learning and listening. You can't be an expert in every single disability that exists out there. Again, I said I have a focus on autism. I have a lot of lived experience with autism. I have read a lot on autism. Uh, and I really pay attention to the things that are going on. But in many ways, I feel like I know less now than I did 10 years ago, just because I realize the breadth of the conversations that are going on. And there's so much that is taking place. So it's not about knowing the most and being the experts, but we can take the time to try to learn and to listen. So when we were looking for a church during that break, uh, we contacted the leaders, the pastors, and said, like, we'd like to come, but we don't know what it's going to look like. And so the pastor and the family pastor came and visited, and they did not say, okay, well, we read an article and we know what autism is about now, so this is what we're going to provide. They didn't do that. They sat there and said, "You tell us what you need, and we will, no promises because don't know what we're able to do, but we will try to walk with you through this, and we will try to make the best uh, experience possible for you." And they listened to what we had to say, and they listened to our concerns and our fears and all of those things. And that made the difference. And I'll tell you, that made a huge difference for us at being at that church at that time. Um, there was one time, again, during the worship service, our son was humming. And uh, I didn't see it, but the pastor, being from the front, could see the congregation and could tell that there was a number of people giving the stink eye, right? The dirty look, thinking, oh, maybe if I give this autistic child a dirty look, that will encourage them to be quiet. That has never worked yet, but the people will keep trying to see if that will make a difference. And he saw that, and he stopped right in the middle of his sermon and just said, "Isn't it great that everyone is welcome in the house of the Lord?" And then he went back to his sermon. And I thought, this guy gets it. He is trying to lead from the front here. And I believe churches should be a place where there's no shame. But if those people with the stink eye felt bad after he said that, I'm okay with that. I can live with it. So, what I've shared with you here is not a full banquet. It's basically purchasing the table, the chairs, it's selecting a few items from the menu, it's some basic groceries that will enable some people to come over and to have a pleasant meal. What I want to make sure to leave with you is that the measurement we're looking for is not perfection. We're not looking for perfection. If we're talking about a literal banquet, if we had to wait until we could make the perfect banquet, we would never have anyone over to our homes, right? Because there would always be something that could be better. So we don't wait for perfection. If we wait for perfection before we include people with disabilities, we are never going to be welcoming them into our churches because we'll never be ready. You have to do something. Do what you can with what you have. This is what I wanted to share with you, the preparation. And this preparation that I've shared with you, most of it does not have a financial cost. Now, there is a cost. It's just not for our bank accounts. It may make us change our thinking on certain topics, but you know what? That's okay. Thank you. Yes. And so that is hard, and I don't have easy answers other than to say, um, again, just to share from my experience. So our two oldest children have autism. Both are minimally verbal, significantly impacted, a lot of needs. They're both in group homes. And at one point, they ended up in the same group home, which we thought was fantastic. Like, if our children can't be with us, the fact that they're living together, this is like the best situation. So we were so happy about that. And it worked well for a number of years. And then it didn't. Same kind of thing. Because autistic people often have the reputation for not having empathy. Our children are hyper empathetic. And so they take on the emotions of what's going on. And so when our daughter would get upset about something, that would get my son upset. And that reaction actually gets her more upset, which And so we visited the group home, and I literally was holding one of my children while the staff were holding the other child because they wanted to get at each other just to stop, like to pummel each other to stop the emotions from flooding, right? And that's not a good situation. And so as hard as it was for us, eventually they had to go their separate ways. So they still are like just a little ways away from each other in terms of homes, but they're in separate homes and they can't be that much around each other because it's just not possible. So we try to make the best of it that we can, and so yeah, I would want to talk to parents to see what is it you want because sometimes we think the best thing is to have this child in the church service. Um, but it might not be the best. If they're overwhelmed and this is not working for them, then maybe there's something else that can be done, right? Yes. So it's messy. It really is messy. And we try to do the best that we can. So my son started attending a church, and he's humming. So the pastor contacted me and said, "Can we put him with like the 12-year-olds?" And he's like 18 at this time. I'm like, "No, you can't do that." But I do also recognize that the people in the congregation were struggling with that, and that's important as well. And at some point, we have to figure out a way, there's gonna be give and take on both. It's not always, well, the autistic person can scream at the top of their lungs every Sunday, and that's okay because that's belonging. That's not what we're looking at, but it's not we need to have peace and quiet every single time. So we have to weigh it, what's going to be the best for both. And, uh, I've asked as well, and my son will respond with, like, yes and no answers, and so we work on that. Um, we actually gave him, or actually the group home gave him the option, to either attend that church where, I got the call from the pastor, or he could watch it online, and it was actually the church that me and my wife were pastoring at, and we were showing them, online, and he chose to watch the online, and so that was his choice. So we tried to give him that. But yeah, that's like praying through it and wrestling. I wish there was an easy calculation that you could put in and say, "This is how, it all comes together." So, yeah. I do appreciate that question, and I feel it. I do feel it. So I think getting people to what shared about worship, like that's part of it, because that does not require someone with a disability, right? Either worship is our attempt to attract new members, or it's something that we offer to God. Now, you could say, yeah, well, can it be both? And yes, it is both, but what is the main purpose of it? What is like the no fail part of worship? And that can be challenged in a church service and say, what is it that would stop this from being worship that God would receive just in general and ask people that. Um, but I would also say it's important to uh, whoever's preaching to acknowledge these things. What the Bible says about disabilities. Um, so, for example, there's lots about disabilities, but if we just read through the Gospels, oh, Jesus healed again, Jesus healed again. So, I guess the biblical message for us is that disabilities are something to be fixed, and uh, then that's what happens, right? Um, so when I'm preaching, so the one church I was at in St. Catharines, we had two people who were blind. And so when I am preaching about Jesus healing someone who's blind, I'm looking at two blind people who have been blind from birth. And I have to acknowledge that. I have to say that the message of this passage is not just that Jesus hates to see people blind, and so he'll fix it if you ask. Same thing. I was videoing, or no, I was preaching on Acts and Peter healing the person who was paralyzed, and the person who's videoing me preach is in a wheelchair. And so I can't just pretend that this is not happening. I don't say, "Oh, just like this guy here." I don't do that, but I need to go a little bit deeper. I can't just say, "Hey, isn't it great that God heals disabled people?" You have to go beyond that. Um, so in many ways, what is needed is not a disability focus as a shifting in what our actual values are. So if we say that love is our primary lens in which everything goes through, then that's going to shift how we welcome someone, right? If excellence is our primary, and there are many churches that do this. I had um, a friend who was on a worship team, and during one of the rehearsals, the worship leader said, "Just so you know, if anyone walks into this building who is able to play your instrument better than you are gone. We value the best, period." And so if that's your lens, right, that's going to affect things. You're not going to tolerate someone making noise or doing something. Yeah. And when it does happen, of course, showing that leadership, people will take notice. Not everyone will like it. I had a person who left the church, and her parting words were, um, you keep emphasizing um, children, poor people, and disabled people, and you can't grow a church that way. That was her parting words to me, and I'm like, well, actually, I actually felt quite encouraged. Like, I thought, I'm on the right track here. Like, this is sounding pretty good. I honestly, it was some of the best encouragement. It's not what she attempted, but um, and it came out in my preaching. I often would talk about this, and even so, when my children were young, um, and they were loving our kids. I mean, they were just so loved by that congregation. But I said to them in my sermon, "They're really cute right now. They're not always going to be cute. They're going to grow up. They're going to be big, and adults are just not as cute as little kids. Will they have the same welcome?" I can't answer that, and I told them I can't answer that. But yeah, those challenges can be made.